This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. Today we dive literally and figuratively into one of the most gripping true stories of World War II. Best-selling author Tom Clavin, known for his vivid historical storytelling in books like Tombstone and Blood and Treasure, turns his attention to the perilous world of submarines in his new book, Running Deep: Bravery, Survival, and the True Story of the Deadliest Submarine in World War II. It's the incredible saga of the USS Tang, the most successful American submarine of the war, and its courageous captain, Richard O'Kane, whose story of valor, survival, and endurance in the face of torture and captivity is nothing short of legendary. Tom Clavin joins us now to talk about Running Deep, the unsung heroes of the silent service, and what drew him beneath the waves of this remarkable history. Tom, welcome back to the Speaking of Writers podcast.
Well, thank you for having me back. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's always great to have you. So, what first drew you to tell the story of the USS Tang and its captain, Richard O'Kane?
Well, like a lot of things, when I've had a chance to do books before, I wasn't specifically looking for this story. I was researching something else and stumbled across a mention about this submarine in World War II that was the most, as you say, the most successful submarine that the U.S. Navy had in World War II, and that it sank, and that the captain and some of its crew members managed to survive. And I said, that's really interesting. I never even heard of the Tang. I'm fairly well versed in World War II history, and how come if it was indeed the most effective, the most successful submarine that the Navy had in the Pacific, I'd never heard of it before. So I started doing more and more research. Each time I looked into it a little bit further, more interesting things happened. The whole silent service, that which the submarine force was called, Captain Richard O'Kane, a Medal of Honor winner, the crew, those who had survived, the distinction that Tang had that it sunk 33 Japanese ships, more than any other submarine in the U.S. had. So I just felt compelled as each step of the way, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this. And thankfully, I had a very supportive editor and publisher in St. Martin's Press that said, let's do it. Let's stop, put anything else aside. Let's do this.
For viewers who may not be familiar, can you describe just how dangerous submarine duty was during World War II?
Well, it was you had the mortality rate for a submarine sailor was 6 times that of a surface ship sailor. So that made it that tells you how dangerous it was. We lost 52 submarines that were sunk during World War II in the Pacific theater. So also you could not be assigned to be part of a submarine crew. You had to be volunteer only. So they lived with risks all the time, and also the conditions. You're talking about being a cylinder basically, 300 feet under the water, and you can go days where you can barely see, maybe not see the sky. You're not seeing the surface. And the other thing that made it so dangerous is that if let's say you're a sailor on a destroyer that gets struck by a torpedo, hit by a plane, um, if your ship is in significant danger, you have the possibility of getting in a lifeboat, or just if you really need to, just jump over the side and try to hold on to something. If a submarine goes down, there are no options really. I mean, it's very, very rare, as what happened with the Tang, that any crew members would survive a sunken submarine, sitting on the bottom.
The Tang was considered the deadliest submarine in the U.S. Navy. Tom, what made it so effective compared to the others?
Well, the captain, Richard O'Kane, and his very dedicated and well-disciplined, cohesive, close relationships of his crew. I sort of refer to it as a band of brothers under the water, underwater band of brothers. They really, in fact, in the book, one of the characters, one of the officers that served under O'Kane, refers to the people he served with as his brothers. It's a very, and so the O'Kane was a risk taker. He was aggressive. He was very intelligent. He figured out some things on the spur of the moment that enabled him to attack Japanese convoys and get away with it. So, as each ship was sunk, they gained more confidence, and so that's why, more so than O'Kane had a knack for seeking out the enemy. Also, I mean, it was like a sixth sense that he had. Let's try this area of the ocean, because when you think about it, the Pacific is so vast and so wide.
Yeah.
You can go on an entire patrol and not encounter an enemy ship.
Yeah, O'Kane is just a fascinating figure. What kind of leader was he? And what did you discover about him that surprised you the most?
He was a leader that he was not a big impo. It wasn't a John Wayne figure. People will see with photographs in the book that He was kind of a slender. He's young too. I mean, when he was captain of the Tang, when he was first appointed captain, I think he was only 32 years old. But he had a lot of good experience, but even by then, by an Annapolis graduate. So he was not an imposing guy, but he had really good focus. He had good self-discipline. He respected and treated his crew well. He was not a haughty guy or anything like that. And he was just somebody they wanted to follow. And when he came up with an idea, they was like, "Okay, Captain, we'll go where you go. You're our captain. Let's go."
The Tang's final mission is almost too tragic to believe. Its last torpedo came back to strike the sub. Only 9 men survived the sinking, including O'Kane, and then endured Japanese imprisonment and torture. How did you approach, Tom, writing those harrowing sections while balancing the humanity of the story, too?
Yeah, that was a difficult part. I mean, in a lot of ways, this book was an easy book to write because once I had all the research done and organized it the way I wanted to organize, it sort of wrote itself. However, having said that, I wrote it in a linear fashion, which means I wrote it in sequence. It wasn't like I wrote the ending last and the middle part first or something like that. So I'm getting closer and closer after having, sort of bonded with these characters, and especially the captain, to the point where I've got to sink that boat. And not only do I have to sink that boat, but they have to be rescued, some of them rescued, and then they have to endure a Japanese prisoner of war camp, a very special kind of prisoner of war camp where, it was not infrequent for people to die from malnutrition or disease or from beatings. So I had gotten, these guys were like my friends, and I had to put them through absolute hell.
Mm. O'Kane's survival and eventual receipt of the Medal of Honor are just extraordinary. What do you think sustained him through those months of captivity?
One of the things that's very interesting is that O'Kane wrote a book years after the war called Clear the Bridge, which is about his experiences with the Tang. And it's about a 360-page book. He devotes 2 pages to his imprisonment in the Japanese
Mm.
camp, which lasted almost a year. And I think what sustained, what he states in the book is that he was determined to see his wife and 2 children again. That's what sustained him. But I think what also sustained him is that he knew that he was, in a way, a symbol. If he could take the worst of it, and he would say to the other guys, "Don't cause any trouble. I'm the one they're after. I'll take the hit," which he did literally. So I think what sustained him also was leading his men, and he realized that he was a source of inspiration and comfort in some ways.
The Tang's crew shared imprisonment, of course, with other famous names like Louis Zamperini, Pappy Boyington. Did you find any interactions or moments between them that stood out?
Louis Zamperini and O'Kane sort of crossed paths in one of the prison camps, but then he was moved to another one pretty soon after O'Kane got there. And a lot of what Louis Zamperini, for those of you who don't know, is the main character in the book Unbroken by Lauren Hillenbrand, which is an amazing book and a great
Yeah.
bestseller. A lot of his experiences he endured came after he and O'Kane went to different camps. Pappy Boyington and O'Kane were the two were for a time the two senior officers in the camp. Pappy being an aviator, of course, O'Kane being a naval officer. And some of their interactions were that Boyington got a cushy job in the kitchen, camp kitchen, and he could help sneak food to O'Kane and sneak food to some of the other inmates there. But in some ways, they were very different kinds of people. Boyington was a cut up, a hard drinker. Of course, he didn't have access to any hard drinks when he was in the camp. But he was a different kind of character personality than O'Kane. They both worked together and cooperated, but they were very different people.
How do you balance historical accuracy with the narrative drives that really make your book so readable?
I don't recall struggling with that in general, not only just for running deep, but with other books too. It's quite the opposite. I think there's so much material. If you do adequate research, there's so much good material, interesting material, that it's hard to include everything you'd like to include. So it's not a matter of I've got to tell a story and make sure it's accurate. I've got to tell a story, make sure it's accurate, and squeeze in as much as I can. Because one of the things I like about nonfiction is that it is true. And especially if you're an author who's like I think many nonfiction authors are, you don't bend the truth to tell a good story. You can do both. They're not mutually exclusive. You can tell the truth, an accurate story, and if the material is exciting enough, you tell an exciting story too.
I remember reading you. I've known Tom for almost 30 years now. We used to do a weekly feature on my radio show when Tom used to work for a newspaper out on Long Island.
Mhm.
I read I think it was your first book. It was a novel back in the mid 90s, or one of your first, maybe it was your second one, early on. And
I deny it.
he denies that book. But so you did some novel writing early on.
I did. I had some short stories published years ago, and I attempted a couple of novels. I never got a novel published that I could recall anyway. And I have since found that I made the right choice by devoting myself to nonfiction. I'm not smart. I realize I'm not smart enough for fiction
Mhm.
because in fiction you also you're not courageous enough because in fiction every you have total responsibility. If you run into a block, if you run into an impasse in your writing, there's not much you can do other than try and get yourself out of it like you're stuck in the mud. With nonfiction, I find if I get stuck anywhere, go back to the material, go back to what actually happened, go back to your real life characters, your real life events. Find something that's going to give you the help to get out of that mud.
Submariners have often been called the silent service. What do you hope
Hmm.
readers take away about their sacrifices and contributions?
I'm glad you asked that because one of the things that made motivated me to do this book is that I think we have a gazillion books about World War II that deal with the infantry, that deal with surface ships like aircraft carriers, that deal with planes. Lightning Down is one of my own books about a P-38 pilot. We have very little material out there about the silent service, about the submarines and how much they meant to the war effort, especially after the devastation of Pearl Harbor when most of the surface ships were either disabled or destroyed. Pretty much what was between the United States mainland and Japan and its huge navy and air force were the submarines. And I think this story, Running Deep, talks about those early days of the war where the submarines were the one of the few weapons the Navy had left.
Give me one word to describe Captain Richard O'Kane.
Undefeated.
Mm,
He would not be broken. In a sense, it's kind of like an unbroken type of story because he would not
yeah.
be broken. He took everything they gave at him and he survived.
What was the first book that made you fall in love with history?
There was a book on a biography by Arthur Schlesinger, and I think it was called The Age of Jackson, about the Andrew Jackson years administration. And I was way too young. At the library where the town I grew up in, I only had a children's card, and I wanted to take this book out, and they wouldn't let me. My mother
Mm.
had to come in and make a big stink about it, and they finally let me. It might probably took me weeks to read, but I was fascinated by the world that Arthur Schlesinger recreated from those 18 somethings. And I just found from then on, I just loved history, American history in particular.
If you could have dinner with any historical figure you've written about, who would it be and why?
Right now it'd be Richard O'Kane,
Mm.
because he's still so much a part of me. I'm thinking of William Barber, who is the captain in charge of Fox Company in the last stand of Fox Company. I'm thinking about Henry Plage, who was the destroyer commander in Halsey's Typhoon. There's That's a really good question. I've never been posed before because I could think of each one of my books that I either wrote or co-wrote, and there's somebody in there, at least one person in there that I would love to have dinner with. So I could
Mhm.
probably pick out. I can name every one of my books and think of somebody.
Tom Clavin's new book is Running Deep: Bravery, Survival, and the True Story of the Deadliest Submarine in World War II. It is out now from St. Martin's Press. It's an extraordinary true account of courage, sacrifice, and survival beneath the sea, and a reminder of the unseen heroes who fought in silence during World War II. You can find Running Deep wherever books are sold. Tom Clavin, as always, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, and thank you for your great questions.
Thank you. And this is the Speaking of Writers podcast. Like it, share it, subscribe to it, write a review. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you again next time.